Hello, everyone. This is Karen Jackson, and I am so happy that you've chosen to follow the Teach-a-thon to the final hours. And we saved the best for last. This is dessert time. And this is the real story of how higher ed is trying to deal with the challenges that come along with COVID-19 and how it's affected our education. We've always said, oh, it's going to change, it's going to change. Well, they're making the change. So I'm so happy to introduce Tarleton State University College of Education professors, and they are going to do the individual introductions, and I'm going to go into the back room and monitor from there. So enjoy. Put all your questions in the chat, and there'll be some links in there for some interactive activities. So keep an eye on the chat, and I will talk to you and see you guys later. Bye.
Hi, I'm Dr. Erin Pearce.
Hi, I'm Dr. Anna Fox.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Colvin.
And that's Dr. Melissa Becker.
I think I'm muted.
Yes, now you're good. But we're going to talk about getting flexible with HyFlex model and the lessons we've learned. We haven't been doing this but 3 weeks, but we have learned so much within 3 weeks. If we could go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, our agenda today is we're going to talk about best practices in delivering content through HyFlex, assessment of learning, virtual relationship building, because it is more challenging to build relationships with students virtually, and then also collaborative learning opportunities that we're able to do virtually.
All right. Can you hear me, Dr. Pearce?
Yes.
All right, good. So we wanted to first just give you a little overview of the HyFlex model and what that looked like at Tarleton State University. We based this approach on the hybrid flexible course design that was brought forth by Dr. Brian Beatty, and he is an associate professor of instructional technology, and now he's gotten a promotion evidently, and he's the associate vice president for academic affairs operations in the Department of Equity, Leadership Studies, and Instructional Technology at San Francisco State University. I want to point out that this is a regional university, so this whole idea came to Dr. Beatty because they have many students who just weren't able to get to campus to take a course. So they reached out to this many years back to solve the problem of their regional university. So it's based on 4 core principles: learner choice. So we want to provide meaningful alternative participation modes and enable the students to choose between the participation modes on a daily, weekly, or topically basis. And then we also want there to be equivalency to provide learning activities in all participation modes that lead to deep learning. Reusability, so they utilize artifacts from learning activities in each participation mode as a learning object for the learning outcomes. And then accessibility, to equip the students with technology skills and equitable access to all participation modes. So actually now they have morphed their approach into, instead of calling it hybrid flexible course design, they're calling it student-directed hybrid learning experiences. So I was able to find a podcast, and it's here on this link for Universal Design Learning, and it's a 50-minute interview with Dr. Brian Beatty where he explains these things in more detail. And we will provide that link to Karen, and then she can give that to you because this is a 50-minute podcast. You can listen to it. It's for free. And also, I located this book, the Hybrid Flexible Course Design, on an open source. So you can have his whole book on an open source and read it at your leisure. And so in our HyFlex, in our version, in Tarleton's version of the flexible HyFlex module, students have the flexibility of attending class in these ways, in these modalities: face-to-face, if they want to do that, synchronously, like a live stream we're using Zoom, or asynchronously. And they can access the recorded course in Canvas and have other assignments to complete to ensure that they've learned the content. But I want to point out to you, just like in the true original, Dr. Beatty's version, we allow students at Tarleton to choose what modality they want, and that modality can change from day to day or week to week or even by topic. So we're going to give you the link to the podcast. We're going to give you the link to the open source text that was this book that I just showed you, and that will all be original and available for you. Okay, Dr. Pearce?
There are some best practices in delivering content through HyFlex. For our particular program, what we tend to do is we have our students actually attend Zoom sessions with us. And we really, really advocate for them to attend those sessions and really, really encourage them because we feel like that interaction component is so important. We would rather them be with us, able to ask questions in real time than to wonder on recorded videos. So one thing that we do is we do have our courses through Zoom. And so there are different Zoom norms that we actually do. And I'll go into more detail about those in just a second. But some other best practices is engagement strategies. You've got to get your kids engaging and you've got to get them speaking to each other, your students. You definitely need some variety. You know, doing a Kahoot 5-6 times over time for the students, it gets a little old, a little stale for them. So you definitely want to incorporate different variety into your lessons. And in fact, using a lot of times I'll use Google Forms and still do the same things that I would do in a face-to-face course, but just using Google Forms where I send out the link and they can access and interact with the different forms. Physical activities, get your students up and moving. Okay. For instance, I wanted my students to, we were doing a lesson on exceptionalities and disabilities. And one of the things that I had the students do is I had half of my students tie shoes and the other half, all of them were able to tie shoes, but half of my students were only able to use one hand and the other students were able to use two. And then I really put the pressure on them to hurry, why are you taking so long? So I wanted them to feel what it was like, you know, to maybe have a disadvantage in some way. Okay. Another thing we also want to keep in mind when best practices occur is equity. And the equity that occurs whenever we deliver content. Sometimes our students don't have computers. Sometimes they're using their phone to access Zooms. So equity is also another thing that we need to consider as far as when we deliver content through HyFlex. And then make it as similar as possible to a face-to-face class. That's why I mentioned the Zoom. You can see right here that what I typically do whenever I do best practices for delivering the content through Zoom is I create links ahead of time that I can just, and this is in a Word document, that I can just copy and paste and put in the chat box. So my students can automatically go click on the link and then do what they need to do, whether it's in their breakout rooms or whether it's an individual assignment. You could go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so some Zoom norms that I have my students do, and they're my students right there. But the first thing that I have them do is I have them rename themselves, and I have them put last name and first name. This makes it very easy for me to do attendance, for me to group them the way that I want to, and really quickly check to make sure everybody's still in class. So whenever they go to a breakout room in Zoom, when you click on the breakout room, it actually lists all the students. So it makes it very easy for me to see who's in there and who isn't. I also have signs for mute, because if you guys have known, like, the most common thing these days and the most common saying in 2020 is you're on mute. So instead of that awkward silence, because you all know it, there's typically this awkward silence when everybody thinks, oh, that person's going to realize they're on mute, and then they don't. So there's that awkward silence, and that's just lost instructional time to me. So what I have my students do is whenever I start speaking and I'm on mute, because it's normally me that's doing it, they all go like this. And this is a signal to me that I'm on mute, and so I immediately click unmute, and then I continue with my lesson. I also have my students blacken their screens whenever they're finished. So whenever they're done with the assignment, they blacken their screens, and that way that lets me know when it's time for me to move on. I mentioned this before, but I send Google links or Google Docs in the chat box a lot. And then I also use QR codes, and I do QR code generators whenever they need to get to a website very quickly. But I also put the link in the chat box as well. I do ask my students to show their work. So you can see right here, this is a picture of my students. I asked them to draw a scientist. And then I'll be really honest with you, most students are going to draw a Caucasian male with crazy white hair in a lab by himself. Okay. And so we talk about, and I poll my students, okay, so select the gender. What's the gender of your scientist? What's the race of your scientist? Where is your scientist? And then we talk about how most of them typically draw a Caucasian male with crazy hair in a lab by themselves. Okay. And so we talk about how that misconception about scientists, in fact, that they're all male, that they're all Caucasian, that's all of those are misconceptions. And science is done. It's a collaborative effort. And so we talk about that. And so we use the polling, and I had them show me their pictures, and I take a picture of their scientists. And so I do a lot of interactive things where they write and then they show me. And another thing, you can assign different tasks based on the breakout room. So we use the learning management system Canvas. And so what we do is we have groups in breakout rooms. So for instance, if I am in Canvas and I want my students to all look at a different lab, so I may list 5 different labs that they're going to look at in Canvas. But I tell them, based on your assigned breakout room, that's the lab you'll choose. So I create breakout rooms, 5 breakout rooms, and then they know if they're in breakout room 1, they're going to look at lab 1. If they're in breakout room 2, they're going to look at lab 2. If they're in breakout room 3, they're going to look at lab 3. So you can assign different tasks in Canvas or in a different learning management system like Google Classroom based on whichever group they're actually clicking to join. And like I mentioned before, I do use breakout rooms to take attendance. Okay, we can go to the next slide. A big thing for virtual learning is breaks. Students need breaks. They need a chance to get up from their chair. And I know that we've come a very virtual meeting world where we're constantly in and out of meetings. I've never been in some meetings in my entire life, so many. But we need breaks from meetings. Okay, we get Zoom fatigue. It's a real thing. So I always schedule breaks. I do a break. We have 3-hour classes at our institution. And so for our particular program. And so I schedule a 5-minute break after an hour and then a 10-minute break after 2 hours. But during that time, I use it to make fun, to make some fun for the course. So I may ask the students to go on a scavenger hunt, for instance. This one right here is a picture. I asked them to bring back something living. And so I use this opportunity, and you'll see some of them brought back their family members and their children. Some of them brought plants. Some of them brought dogs. So I also use this to help build relationships and really start to get to know my students, because I got to know who had children, who was bringing children into the room, who was bringing dogs, who were bringing cats, who's bringing a plant. So you can really start to build relationships with your students and make the breaks fun. Sometimes I have them go search for an object that they think is a meter long. Okay, I'm a science methods teacher, so all of this is science. And so in this particular picture right here, this gave me an opportunity to talk about biotic and abiotic factors just from this one break. And it also allowed me a little bit of insight into their lives as well. And it also made sure that my students get up from their chair, because even if we take a break, it's not guaranteed that students are actually going to get up and move around. And we need them to get up and move around for them to make it for the entire 3 hours. Okay. So virtual relationship building. One thing that is very, very important with virtual learning is to still maintain those relationships that you would have in a face-to-face course. One thing that I do in my strictly online courses, because I do have courses that are strictly online, is I have them do an introduction video in a discussion board. And so I give them prompting questions, tell me something that's on your bucket list. Tell me 5 interesting facts about yourself. Where are you from? What do you currently do for a job, if you have a job? And so they answer all of these in a discussion board post in a video that they create. This allows them to learn how to create videos within our Canvas learning management system. But then they also have to watch each other's videos. And so what they end up doing is they create a ring of friends. And so what that looks like is it starts with one student, and they have to find a similarity to somebody else. And then that other person, they have to find another similarity to another student and another similarity to another student. And so they find similarities between each other, and then it eventually comes full circle back to themselves. But this really allows students to tell us something interesting, because some of the facts that I've received from students just truly blow me away. And so it allows us a little insight into their lives. Another thing that you can do is you can use Padlet, which is a technology application, to help build community within your classroom. to maybe start with a fact and have other students build on that and see what they have in common. So for instance, at the top of the Padlet, it might has an animal, and then they can put their name underneath it and what animal that they have. And so they start seeing commonalities amongst the group. Also, you can create a learner profile where the student actually creates a document about themselves and how they learn. And so as the professor, you start to learn about your students and what's best for their learning. And then we also have the Google Slide class book. And Lisa, would you like to elaborate on that one a little bit?
I actually have a whole, we're gonna actually show the whole thing later, but what I do is it's connected to the content. It's a writing course, and each student is assigned a slide that they contribute
Perfect.
to.
Okay, next slide, please. Another thing about virtual relationship building, many of the professors at our institution are okay with sending out text messages to their students, and also for the students to have that two-way communication with them. Not everyone is as comfortable with this, but there's also the Remind 101, which is a one-way text messaging system. Student memes are also a great way for virtual relationship building, where they end up building their own memes. You can also be available for coffee time. So if you want to be available before your course for coffee, if it's in the morning, and sometimes people like coffee in the afternoon or in the evening. I know that I would stay up all night long if that happened. There's also some of our professors do Sunday Night Live, where somebody comes in every Sunday night and they're available for the students to ask questions. We also have read alouds by the professors as well, where they actually read within their courses. And then also, one thing you want to do is you want to assign breakout rooms randomly, and that helps students get to know each other. So in Zoom, there's this ability for breakout rooms, which means that you have a large class, and then you can separate your students out, and they randomly go into different rooms based on how many students you want in that room. And then if you randomly do that, students really start to get to know each other, and they're able to bounce ideas off of each other. Another virtual relationship building is sharing of personal writing, where the professor shares first, and then students can share about their own personal writing. There are also me bags, which will be discussed a little bit later, and then also scavenger hunts, which will be discussed a little bit later. Okay.
So I'm on, and you can tell that I work with some of the best professors in the world at Tarleton State University. So I kind of want to talk about assessment. So an article by Burns in 2020, so it's pretty recent, looked at what the 4 tips of online assessment, because we're kind of all there. So we want to provide the students with options. We want them to have some options on how we're going to carry out some assessments. We're going to make feedback actionable and relevant to the task. We're going to make our feedback personal, and we use Canvas, and so we can even record our feedback, which is a really nice feature in Canvas that we can give. So it's voice to text, and it will record what we're saying, and that makes it a little bit faster. But we also need to have a routine. So when we build our courses, I'm getting feedback. I'm sorry. When we build our courses in our online shell, we need to show routine, and so assessment can fall in all different places. But it needs to be sort of a predictable routine in how we're going to do that. But sometimes we need to have a little variety too. So, Dr. Becker, if you'll go to the next slide, and this. I looked at this and I divided this in 3 what seems 3 areas. So what I can do assessment before class, I can do it during class, and I can do it after class. So before class, I often provide my students with a podcast. A podcast can be something that I found out there that I actually teach a literacy course, and it is about the science of teaching reading. And so I found a really good podcast series on the science of teaching reading. And so I provide it with my students in advance. And then I give them a 1-point open-ended question quiz as they finish that particular podcast. Also, Dr. Becker and I teach a professional development class, and we provide reading guides in advance of our course content, and the reading guide follows the reading for the week. And those reading guides are actually used as an assessment. And so basically what that means, if they read and they follow the reading guide and they basically fill in the blanks, and they can do that a lot of different ways. They can, and my students are submitting that in all kinds of different ways. Some of them are doing it right on their computer. Some of them are printing it and then filling it in. Some of them are taking pictures. So the submission has to be a little more open-ended, but providing them that time where they and just guiding their reading. Our students are first semester juniors, and so giving them that structure is really helpful. But we do have a sense of grading that and giving it a grade and assessment for that. So during class, I can do polling activities, and it can be real formative. Did you understand this concept? Tell me, is this a one answer poll? And a lot of times those literacy things that we're doing in the literacy courses, they have and giving some immediate feedback when we get into that. We can use Nearpod that way, those of you who use Nearpod, or however you can do polls in a lot of different apps. And it might be just a really one quick question quiz, and then you can kind of get a formative idea of what you might need to cover again. I also use Google Jamboard and Google Slides, where they can create, and we kind of talked about that earlier. Erin referred to that. And I have found that the slides are really great when I'm doing a literacy circle, or the Jamboard might be more appropriate when they're creating something. It's a more of a creative space. So they're in breakout rooms doing this, and I do what I go in and I eavesdrop. I go in there and I listen to their discussion. They ask me questions, and it's another way of a formative assessment. I can answer questions they have right there on the spot with them in the breakout room. I can also see what they're doing in Canvas as far as or Jamboard. I can see what they're doing. One example I have, and I should probably try to share it here in a little bit, but we were labeling or diagramming the reading brain and the different parts of the brain where reading takes place. And that was really telling on whether or not they had read the chapter. So it can be a little bit of an assessment right in the minute, and then we can go back and we can make corrections. You can also use your reading guide in a different way and use it more of as a listening guide as you're going through your online or in Zoom lecture. Interactive notebooks seem to be really popular for students to be able to collect information over time, and that can be sort of maybe a completion assessment or a summative type thing. I believe in the whole idea of low stakes writing, where I have a paper in 2 of my courses that are kind of a big paper. So each week I'm giving them a little prompt, and for just a couple of points, and then I can go back and give them feedback. And what I tell them is that if you do the prompts correctly, then you're basically going to almost create your paper by the end. And so that's really low stakes kind of quiz grade. Of course, we know there's the summative type of assessment that we all do when we give the test, when we give the quiz. But I found that if I do a lot of low stake quiz in assessments, that they're learning more, and especially in this format that we're in right now. So I think I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. Colvin now. Or maybe we're going to discuss together collective learning opportunities. So you want to go?
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yep.
For collaborative learning opportunities, there's so many, and we're learning all the time from each other. These are just some ideas that we can do debates through discussion boards. You can have a regular discussion board in Canvas, but you can also post a controversial topic and have them defend that topic and support it. My colleagues, do you have an example of that? Have you done one of those? No.
I've changed. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So what I have done is we study about different ways of conducting your classroom. So we talked about, for instance, whether we should let the students get up and move, find their own places in the room to work, or should we have everyone stay in the seat and be seated? Now, these are K-12 students we're talking about. And so sometimes, because of the way the class lends itself, they all want to say, yes, let them move. So what I have done is assign them a side to the debate, and then they've got to come up with reasons. And I think that helps them be critically think through the arguments that are perhaps different from what they have in their own mind.
I think it helps with research too. So if that's not the side that they normally would have chosen or initially would have chosen, that they can do some research and find some support for the other side, and it helps them see the other perspective.
Yes.
We use Google Docs and Google Slides quite a bit. We use it as formative assessments. We use it for collaborative activities. We broadcast messages to groups that when they're in breakout rooms, Dr. Pearce referred to earlier, how she does that. I do that as well while they're working in groups, that I might tell them messages or send them a link through the broadcast so that they can stay on topic, so that they can do something new with what they've already been assigned to do, and also just letting them know it's time to wind up and we're going to meet back and be ready to share. We use Google Links for group activities, and we're going to talk about Jamboards and look at an example of that. And then we do different kinds of scavenger hunts as well, where they may go find something and bring it back to show that they have at home that relates to content, or they may create something through Google in their breakout rooms to share, and they're collecting evidence from home to put in the slides, or maybe from the internet. These are two pictures that I actually did this week from Jamboards. And so on the left is there was actually 5 groups. So you're seeing 3 at the top, and then one is pulled down here, and then one of them is pulled out on the right. And so this was for an early childhood class, and they were using sticky notes and graphics, and I had given them certain things to do with various areas of child development. So they needed to find something that represented physical development, intellectual, emotional, and social development, and find links for physical activity to do with young children that they could share with us. And so it was a way for them to work together on the Jamboards for each group, and then they could come back and share some of the things that they found about child development. And then let's go back though. Do we want to show that other Jamboard?
We could do it at the end.
Okay.
Let's stay until the end.
All right, so this is another example of something I did in class, and it was actually, they did it independently, and then the next week we came back and we read our class book together, even though they would have had the opportunity to read it at any time they wanted to, because it was shared with all of them. It was fun to come back and read the whole thing together that we created. And so what I had done was I had read this book, I Am Enough by Grace Byers. And then we created a class book called We Are Enough. And I did an example slide. So that's just the cover that I created for everybody. And then I typed everybody's name on a slide so they knew which slide was theirs. And then if you can go to the next one, you can see my example there. So there was a pattern in the book similar to this. So like the blank, I am here to blank. And so I gave them a couple of examples here, and then they really blew me away with their technology abilities and their higher level thinking. So we can click through some of these, and so you can see some of the ideas they came up with. So they're going to teach me how to do some of that movement stuff, because I don't know how to do that. I love that. And how they make those backgrounds. I love it. I felt so basic. Look at that one. All right. Yeah. So what I really love about this is that it just gives us a different way to not only springboard off a book that I had read, because this was a writing class. It gave them a low stakes writing opportunity because it was only a couple of lines, and they were linking it to a book, and they were seeing the value of creating a class book. So when they have classrooms of their own, they can do something like this, or create regular class books on paper and laminate them and put them in their class library, or they can use something like this where the students get to create it on their own and print them out and laminate them and put it in the class class library as well. So those were fun activities. All right. So one other Jamboard activity that we wanted to show.
Yeah.
I have one that's finished, so you have one that started, Melissa. So whatever you want to do.
Yeah. So, Karen, can you put the link in the chat? And if you will click on the link, it's going to take you to the Google Jamboard, and there's 4 pages. And so you don't need to write on each page, but they ask you questions at the top of each page. So just pick you one and then look over to the left. That will show you all the tools that are available to you to use in the Google Jamboard. And I just encourage you to experiment with each of those tools. But the questions are things like, what is the benefit of teaching virtually? What is the best idea you've learned from this conference? What's something you can do tomorrow that you've learned from this conference? And so if you'll take just a moment and enter some of that information on whichever slide you like. And like Dr. Colvin said, we can see as you're entering that information on the slide, we can see as you're creating them. And then after you've done yours, you can flip through and look at what other people have done.
I had 2 other quick things I wanted to add that I had written down while other people were talking. There was Dr. Pearce had mentioned earlier, the me bags. That's something I do in the early childhood class. And normally in a regular, strictly face-to-face classroom, they would bring things into the class and we'd take class time to share items that were special to them. So I tell them it's 3 to 5 items. And then one bonus item is something from your childhood. So it links to the course. And so we get to know each other that way. And we get to find connections with each other that way. And then also see the value of really supporting young students with things that they love and including those in the classroom. So that's something that I've done. So this time what I did was, we took time and I split it up over the course of the class period. And it's like Erin was saying earlier, 3-hour class period. So I had, 10 students sharing at the beginning of the class and 10 in the middle and 10 at the end. And they only took, 1 to 2 minutes to show us their items and explain why they chose those items to represent themselves. So I felt like that was a really good way to do that. And then another thing is when we were talking about breakout rooms, one other way that I build relationships that way is because they're getting to be in different breakout rooms with different people all the time, which I think is a real huge bonus, because in the regular classroom, they tend to just pick their friends if you just let them choose whoever they want. And so this way they're forced to get to know other people. So one thing that I do is I sometimes say, okay, the leader is going to be, the person who has the most pets, and the timekeeper is going to be the person who exercises the most on Saturdays. And so they go to their breakout rooms, and that forces them to talk and get to know each other, in a different way on different topics before they start the assignment.
I was sitting here thinking about everything that we do, and we know that a lot of this stuff we have done when we've had our students face to face. We've just kind of taken on a different view of how that looks when we're teaching virtually, because we are doing all of our teaching virtually because we are a teacher ed program and they have to be in the field as well. But there's some things that I think that I've learned that I really want to keep in my course, and doing some of these things, virtually, or even them doing independently or doing in small groups online as we go along. Because I think that there's a lot of great, a lot of benefit from it. I don't know about you, what you all think, but I think that even them learning these technical tools are really, really important for them for the future. and having these, and it's real time and real skills that we're using right now. So, and newfound skills, right?
I think we're learning to be very creative and thinking out of the box. Like one thing we're going to do next week in the early childhood class is we're talking about the importance of play as learning in early childhood. And so normally on that day in class, I would bring bubbles and I would bring blocks and Play-Doh and things like that. So we'd have those experiences and get to talk about those experiences after we do the activities that I have. So this time what I've told them to do in preparation for next week is to get bubbles or make your own bubbles. So they're going to have to research if they want to make their own bubble solution, and then to get Play-Doh or make your own Play-Doh if they want that experience of making their own Play-Doh. So we're still going to do those activities, but it'll just be in a different way.
That's right.
So in closing, I think the most important thing is that we keep our students engaged in whatever our content is. And the more that they can actively do, the better. And the other thing is to get them up and moving around. Otherwise, we're going to end up sitting so long at the computer during the class, and to schedule those breaks like Dr. Pearce said at the very beginning. So in closing, does anyone, Karen, do we want to take questions? Are there any questions in the chat that we need to talk about?
Hey there. Looking at the comments, no, but just I thought that you brought out several points about interactivity and things you used to do before, but now you're really very intentional about it. And I think that's so helpful for future teachers to see that and model that and experience that, and then they bring that to their students. So I really applaud you all for doing that. There weren't any questions that I noticed. I made all kinds of comments and I pasted the links multiple times.
Okay.
I provided at the bottom an additional Jamboard that's actually one that my students worked on. And I covered up all the names. There's no names there, but just something that if someone wants to take a look at.
All right.
I will say about Jamboard, I know we're trying to leave here, but Jamboard is a little bit freer. It's a little bit more free than a slide. So there's a lot more ability to be creative. Sorry.
Okay. All right. That's great. Any more wrapping up, or you feel good about what you shared? And
yeah.
Any last words? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so very much.
Well, thank you, Karen.
For preparing,
thank you, Karen.
Using this platform, and you're doing great things for teachers and students. And what a great way to cap off this teach-a-thon, because believe it or not, it would seem that you were influenced by everything everyone was talking about, from international and global teachers and teachers of wellness and just all kinds of, we've had all kinds of educators. So thank you very much for capping it off. And I'm going to go find John, and we're going to do one final message, but for sure, thank you very much. I'm going to sign off.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.